This is the strategic document, strategic planning for Chelmsford's future. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the committee who has worked so diligently and feverishly on this document for the last 19 months. We started this process in January of 2009. We've met consistently 2 times a month. We've had many public input sessions, and I'd just like to take an opportunity publicly to acknowledge the individuals that have really rolled up their sleeves and got at it in this process. So first is Philip Iliopoulos is the vice chair. Philip. George Zaharoulis is the clerk. Peter Robson. Dave McLaughlin. Sheila Pichette. Linda Prescott. Jackie Hoonjan. Our recording secretary, Vivian Merrill, who takes all of our meeting minutes, everything that we want to say and don't want to say, she records it all. Evan Belansky is here in the crowd. He's our community development director here in Chelmsford, and has been very helpful throughout the process, guiding us along. And then I'd be remiss if I did not introduce our partners, NEMCOG, who has been with us there every step of the way. Some of these folks have been at every meeting with us, and the rest of the folks I'm going to introduce are behind the scenes, working hard, putting all this documentation together. Beverly Woods, the executive director of NEMCOG, Northern Middlesex Council of Governments. Jay Donovan, who's the assistant director. Out in the crowd here, we've got George Russell. George, if you could raise your hand. Thank you. Sean Loge. David, who's my projector friend tonight. He's going to help me out advancing the slides. And last, but certainly not least, Sarah Bradbury. Sarah, thank you. So in January of 2009, one of the very first things that this committee decided was that they needed to have a mission statement to guide them through the process and to constantly review, keep them on target for this plan. The mission statement of the Master Plan Committee is to produce a 2010 master plan in a manner that is timely, within budget, transparent, and open to all stakeholders, in an effort to provide a public process that is collaborative, cooperative, and coordinated with the goal of achieving consensus and endorsement of the issues, goals, objectives, and implementation strategies. With that in mind, the committee kept in some guiding principles from the 1996 master plan. Recall the fundamentals of the 1996 master plan. The guiding principles that this committee kept in mind were to maintain the suburban character of Chelmsford and recognize that unplanned and uncontrolled development in the industrial, commercial, and residential areas of the town may contribute to a poorer quality of life. Be cautious of the type of growth that will erode the remaining rural characteristics of the town. Increased traffic, increased parking, and dramatically change the nature of the town. And finally, maintain sufficient natural areas so that open space, plant, and wildlife species can be sustained. Ensure that Chelmsford remains sustainable. And because sustainable in today's day and age is such a buzzword, I want to read to you what the definition of sustainable was with this committee as we used it as our guiding light. And this is right from the concepts in the 1996 master plan. Sustainability means the town remains fiscally sound, services are maintained or improved, and schools maintain high academic standards. This also means that water, sewer, transportation, and telecommunications infrastructure remains sufficient. Additionally, we have resources to protect our wetlands, recreation and open space, natural, cultural, and historical resources. It means we make an efficient use of our land and buildings based on the intrinsic carrying capacity. In addition, it means we provide housing and economic opportunities for our residents. The next guiding principle was to adopt a sensible and sustainable land use policy. Chelmsford's land use policy should include prioritizing the reuse and redevelopment of existing structures rather than promoting new construction. It should include new zoning regulations that control and encourage redevelopment where there is a zero net increase in building square footage. The land use policy should increase landscaping, improve stormwater management, and create significant improvements in parking, transportation, and the traffic systems. Where additional building square footage is allowed, the site impacts should be fully mitigated. And finally, the last guiding principle is to adopt zoning regulations for housing and economic development that prioritize opportunities to include reuse, rehabilitation, and retrofitting of existing structures, that require all new development and redevelopment to fully mitigate any increased impact that result in a net benefit to the town and environment while protecting open space. We should discourage development for the sole purpose of revenue chasing. We recognize that town-owned property might play an integral role in the housing opportunities. Before I advance to the next slide, I do want to let you know that the Master Plan Committee felt that this was so important, they put it in a letter to the residents that will preclude everything else in the master plan document. So a little bit about the process. This graphic outlines the in-depth process that this committee underwent along with NEMCOG. We had public input. Many of you were probably here in March of 2009 when we set a vision statement. We had a very fruitful SWOT analysis to analyze the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of the community. We held stakeholder input, and we had committee review and discussion throughout the entire process. This is the extensiveness that went into this process. 6 public input sessions, including tonight. 30 stakeholders were interviewed. Over 42 publicly posted meetings. Over 135 committee hours to date. That's not including all of the homework that these nice people had to take home with them every single night and every weekend. A lot of reading. Over 100 and, the town of Chelmsford and the NEMCOG websites have had the information on there as far as ongoing drafts, and they've been updated. The final update was done on Friday after we had voted on the final sections on Thursday night. We've also provided updates through town meeting. Board of Selectmen have provided updates, and the Planning Board has been ongoing with updates throughout the process. And that's to keep transparency so that people understood. Those are televised events. People that were tuning into them would understand what was going on with this master plan process. And also, we started every meeting with open session for anybody that wanted to come in and talk to the committee directly and offer input, which we had quite a few people come in to do that. So I'm gonna go through the 8 sections, and I'm gonna go through relatively quickly here. The first thing that you're gonna see up on the slide is what we had for goal statements. And you will see this in the master plan that introduces each section. The first section being land use and zoning. Manage the direct growth, including redevelopment and new development, in a manner consistent with the community's character, and ensure that the town's zoning and land use policies and practices are consistent with the approved master plan. Reduce and eliminate land use conflicts to the greatest extent possible. Protect the character of the town's residential neighborhood, and that's pretty important, where we're 68% of our tax base is residential property. Enhance the visual appearance of the community through creation of design guidelines for appropriate areas. And finally, encourage the preservation of green space in every redevelopment and development project while striving to reduce the amount of impervious surface. And for those of you who don't know what impervious surface is, it's asphalt or hot top in parking lots and such. The next section was economic development. To establish an active economic development program to retain and attract businesses which enhance the town's tax base and create well-paying jobs in a manner that balances job creation with the quality of life. And you may have seen some documents that were out there. 2008, there was an economic development plan that was published. It was never formally adopted by any board, but the economic development, community development department has used that on several of their analysis. It is part of the document. It is also, there is one item that was brought to my attention earlier this week regarding 280 and 284 Chelmsford Street, where in the economic development section, that says it's targeted for a commercial rezoning, and that is not, in fact, the case. If you look in the land use section, we have that as a potential redevelopment for residential RB zoning. And that, for those of you who aren't familiar with Chelmsford Street, that's the residential side that's down near Evergreen Street at the triangle intersection that joins into Chelmsford Street. So that's something that the committee will go back next week, and we'll make sure that gets reflected and that gets taken off the map that's in the economic development section, as well as the short narrative that's in there. And I do appreciate the folks that brought that to my attention. Regarding transportation and circulation, improve and enhance the community's established transportation network by expanding public transit options, promoting alternative transportation modes, and implementing traffic improvements that are directed at alleviating congestion and improving safety. The guiding principles there for the goal statement are: improve the management of the parking to better serve the needs of residents, businesses, and visitors; create a bicycle and pedestrian-friendly transportation network that is safe for people of all ages and abilities. And I do want to pause and just thank the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee here in town. They were instrumental in providing us with a wealth of information. Tom Gosder, if you're here in the audience, thank you very much. You showed up at a ton of meetings and were very fruitful in our analysis, and thank you. Next section was housing. Promote the development and maintenance of diverse and affordable housing opportunities for Chelmsford residents, consistent with the community's character for all income levels, lifestyles, and age groups. Proactively work with the Chelmsford Housing Authority and Community Preservation Committee to preserve existing housing and develop new housing opportunities to address the diverse housing needs of the community. Update the town's affordable housing production plan to be submitted to the Massachusetts Department of Housing and Community Development, and that's ongoing. As I understand now, they're reaching the final phases of that. Open space and recreation. Manage, preserve, and protect the open space and recreation resources, and invest in the expansion of these areas in order to enhance the quality of life. Encourage the utilization and enjoyment of open space and recreational resources by town residents. Improve the management and maintenance of the town's open space and recreational assets. Provide connections between the town's open spaces and recreation areas, and provide a link to regional resources and facilities where appropriate. And finally, provide a broad range of recreational opportunities for residents of all age groups and abilities. The next section was natural, cultural, historical resources. Maintain, protect, and preserve the natural, cultural, and historical resources that provide the town its unique identity and enhance the quality of life to its residents. Minimize the environmental impact of future development and redevelopment projects to preserve natural resources and protect public health. foster public appreciation and civic pride in the town's historic and natural resources, and promote Chelmsford's cultural assets and resources. And finally, require the remediation of contaminated sites to protect the environment and to return vacant sites to proactive use. And again, that's happening now. It's on the Katrina Road site, which is down off of Glen Avenue behind the old Chelmsford Cinema, which is going to be Stop and Shop one day. They're going through a cleanup down there now. And the final section is the facilities and services section. I just want to pause, and again, I want to give accolades where accolades are deserved. The Permanent Building Committee, as well as Gary Persichetti, the town's facilities director, were instrumental in providing us the information that we needed to put this section together. It was not part of the original scope when we first signed the contract with NEMCOG, but they had done such a great job of putting together so much data that with the help of Evan Belansky on the narrative sections and NEMCOG helping us wordsmith it, we were able to incorporate this in as an extra added section, and it's well worth it because we need to protect our town facilities as well as everything else. So thank you, Gary, and the Permanent Building Committee. We appreciate that. The second piece of this is the services section. And again, I'm going to give accolades where accolades are deserved, and that's to the Northern Middlesex Council of Governments. They were able to shift around some money that wasn't being used on the Drum Hill study to supplement this in our master plan at no cost to the town, and they did a wonderful job with our town services. With that, the goal statement is to provide high quality and cost-effective and accessible services and facilities to meet the changing to meet the needs of the town's residents and businesses. Provide community services that meet the needs of all residents regardless of income, age, gender, or ability. Such services include education, public safety, public health, town administration, library, recreation, and social services. Maintain and enhance and improve the town's infrastructure and facilities in a manner consistent with best practices in using the latest technology. And finally, coordinate the provision of community facilities and services in an efficient manner by planning and budgeting for larger projects based on anticipated community needs. The final section of the master plan document is the most important section. In over 40 years of master planning here in the town of Chelmsford, we've never had an implementation plan like this. I do want to spend some time and explain it so that everyone understands how it would work. The implementation committee would be made up of 9 members. It would have 2 planning board representatives, the chairman and an additional member elected by the planning board, or 2 members that are chosen from the membership body. The town manager would sit on this committee. The Zoning Board of Appeals chairman or their designee. The Conservation Commission chairman or his designee. The Board of Selectmen chairman or designee. The Community Preservation Committee chairman or designee. 1 town meeting rep and 1 citizen rep. The planning board would solicit appointments from the various boards and commissions. The town manager would appoint the town meeting member and the citizens representative. The planning board would then inform the town manager of the names of the appointees, and the Board of Selectmen would confirm the final appointments. The Master Plan Implementation Steering Committee role is to serve as a facilitator and a coordinator of the implementation process, to advocate for the implementation of the recommendations, and to report annually to the town meeting body regarding the town's progress. In addition, the steering committee would assist the planning board with any amendments that may be needed to either the master plan document or the implementation timetable, the table over time. And the table is which you have listed in your packet. It's got immediate, which is less than 1 year. It's It's got short-term, which would be 1 to 3 years. It's got intermediate, which would be 3 to 6 years, and then long-range or long-term would be 6 to 10 years. This is a 10-year plan for the town, so 10 years would be the max on that. With this setup, we would have accountability for the individuals that are responsible for the implementation of these recommendations. They would meet, as we envision it, on a quarterly basis to discuss progress, timelines, and whether or not there needs to be any bump outs of time and why that would be. And then they would be responsible, one member of that committee would be responsible to come back to town meeting and report on that annually. They would not have any voting privileges. The document at that point would be accepted, and there would be no reason to have voting privileges on that. Like I had indicated, they would need to go back to the planning board if changes were needed. So with that, that concludes the presentation. I would like to open it up to questions. Before I do that, I would like to just set some ground rules so we have some structure here tonight. If we could keep, 2 minutes at the microphone would be good. If it goes a little bit longer, I'm not going to be keeping track of the time. If we could make sure that if somebody's already asked a question or provided feedback, we don't take up time to repeat the same thing again. Trying to get as much feedback as possible. Also, if you have pagers or cell phones or any other type of technology that's going to be loud and disruptive, if you could silence that or shut it off if you don't need to have it on, that would be very helpful. And with that, I will open it up to the public. Ms. Deary, one thing I did forget is if you could state your name and address for the record.
My name is Debbie Deary. I live at 19 Stedman Street. I'm in a town precinct 6 rep. I don't necessarily have any questions. I read a good portion of the master plan, and I did make a copy of it. And I did go all to one of the meetings that you held here. But I'd like to read you some of my thoughts after reading what you had. And I did put them on paper, so I won't. On page 34 of your land and use zoning points out that there are multiple benefits concerning of mixed-use development and healthier lifestyles for residents living with a mixed-use district. Although this might be true, I would like to address the unhealthy effects that is imposed upon our neighborhoods due to the fact of the increased traffic emissions that we are exposed to decreases air quality. One summer day, my husband was recouping from surgery, took a walk down Stedman Street. He was planning to walk to the corner at Dalton Road, and he was forced to turn around to the automotive fumes. He returned home and told me the air was so heavy that he could not continue. The exposure in our area due to the high volumes of cars and trucks not only leave neighbors with a congested traffic on a daily basis, but also does affect their quality of life. We did not have control over the asphalt plant exposure to the emissions of trucks and from the plant itself, but we do have a choice now as to what we want for the future of our town. The daily traffic that affects the 110 corridor from the center of town to the Route 3 line at the border of Lowell is one of the most congested areas in Chelmsford. The volume of traffic, because of the two major highways, are also accessed by Chelmsford Street on a daily basis, makes me wonder why we would consider expanding development in this area. According to the current statistics given by Chief Murphy, the Chelmsford Street corridor from Central Square to the Lowell line is the second most problematic area in our town for traffic accidents. He states that because of the main road with heavy volume of traffic, numerous intersections and commercial parking lots with traffic entering and exiting, it is prone to a higher crash rate. I recently needed to use the laundromat on Chelmsford Street, and it was very difficult not only to find a parking space, but it was also an experience to exit the intersection of Wilson and Chelmsford Street. How can we even consider building a fire station on the corner in a highly congested area where there are already two sets of lights nearby? I don't understand the expansion of Papa Gino's as in the master plan. That I don't understand. I didn't read it thoroughly, and why would anyone want to fight the traffic to enter and exit when there were so many other restaurants in town that have more parking spaces and more accommodating to visit? The Farmer Skids property needed many variances to be built. One of the main reasons that the planning board was reluctant to approve the development was because it was too large for the property without enough parking. It was not long after Jasmine's open that reality set in, and the owner once again came before the board because they didn't have enough parking spaces and were required to turn to the Radisson Hotel to secure the necessary spaces that they needed. I should point out that they were the only business that was using the property at the time. The town asked that the state approve a turning lane in this area to make it easier for the increased traffic, and it was denied. The crash data from 111-109 through 8/31/10 states that the Chelmsford Street at Dalton Road had 9 crashes, and Chelmsford Street, routes 495, had 7 crashes. Golden Cove Road had 5 reportable crashes. Chief Murphy reported that, his definition of reportable crashes is defined by personal injury or property damage over $1,000 that requires a police accident report to be filed. There are many accidents on Stedman Street that might not require an accident report, but it's happening all too often. My mailman's truck has been hit many times while stopped with his lights on. They just don't slow down in the current 30-mile-an-hour zone. I do know that when the buildings on 129 were fully rented, that the traffic on Stedman Street was bumper to bumper, and it went beyond Dalton Road on a daily basis. The evening traffic in the Westland area leaves you to believe that you are hostage in your driveway until someone decides to be gracious to let you leave. The reduction of parking spaces has me concerned. Some days it is necessary to ride around Market Basket lot looking for a parking space. The Saturday traffic that you encounter on Chelmsford Street that forces a police officer to direct traffic in front of St. Jean d'Arc Credit Union is a good example why more development in this area is not needed. The future Stop and Shop has not been built. It's really going to put a further strain in the area that is stretched to the limit. How can we possibly welcome the expansion of the Chelmsford Mall and more development in the area that appears overbuilt? This is an affordable area to live in, but if what is being proposed to expand and develop to the point that I was reading in the master plan, it will decrease our property values. And it leads me to believe that all we're going to end up with more traffic. And our houses no one will want to purchase our homes because as it is now, people question the traffic in our area and why we're even living there now. The 110 corridor has 2 hotels, an assisted living facility, 4 gas stations, the on and off ramps to 2 major highways, 2 malls, restaurants, and many smaller business establishments. How much more can this area be built to declare that it is enough? The master plan has not given enough thought to the lives of the residents that live in this area if it's to be developed as what's proposed. Is this the beginning of the next 10 years of the decline of our area? I will also add, I have lived in this area for 35 years. In 16 years, next month, I had a phone call from an attorney that was representing Osco Drug. And I was told at the time, if I sold my property and the residents that lived behind me, they said the rest would go. They wanted our property. Our property as a business property is worth a lot more than it is as a residential property. As you know, the property values have declined. At the increase of traffic, to the extent that we are living on a daily basis in our area, it's horrific. There was an accident, I don't know what happened around noontime today. The traffic was stopped. There was an accident last summer on 495, last August, I believe, and it was a truck on 495. There was a death. It took me an hour to go from my house to the center school to pick up a student. It was stopped. So when we think about developing more on Chelmsford Street, from the center of town to the lower line, we really need to consider this. One accident on 495 or Route 3, everything stops. And it all depends on how bad the accident is as to how long it stops. What I read, it was recent figures from Chief Murphy. There was an accident the day before last at the end of my street. I could see the backboard from my house at the corner of Dalton and Stedman. Ruth Delaney died at the corner. She was plowed because somebody decided to go through the light. It's Stedman and Chelmsford Street, that area there. Her car was pushed to the 495 exit until the on-ramp. Please consider, when you talk about developing that corridor, take into account the people that live there on a daily basis, the accidents that we see that are not reported. And it's many and it's numerous. And it's not fair to us because it will decrease our property values. To live there on a daily basis, it really is astounding. You'd have to sit there, and they're not driving 30 miles an hour. They're driving 45 to 50 miles an hour. I know, I got hit in front of my house. The estimated speed was 45 miles an hour. The sign's there, 30 miles an hour. So please consider that. I appreciate it.
Deb, before you leave, I want to make sure I got everything that you said because you gave us quite a bit of information. So I got Chelmsford Street and the congestion on Chelmsford Street and the concern.
Well, you know, Jim, because we talked about skips. I came back from vacation at Hampton Beach with the proposal was to be built on that skip's land. I don't even know what they call the plaza now. I came home because I felt that strongly about, at the time, they were supposed to have a donut shop and a bank on either end. The traffic in our area is that bad. And although I live where I live, I am affected by it all. It's on a daily basis. The figures are there. The accident counts are there. There was 2 deaths on my street alone that I know, plus whatever else. But some of those accidents are very serious. And if you think about it, there's only one, well, the other hotel in this whole town, and that's the Hawthorne Suites, which it's in a good area, which is off Technology Drive. But you're talking about Stop and Shop coming in an area that's already so congested, and there's many accidents in that area. They don't slow down, and they don't stop at red lights. And you're also talking about Katrina Road. And then we have the development of the V&A. They're going to build the V&A on Manahan Street. And there's also a suggestion that they're going to increase. I don't know how much more our area can take. Have you been down on Chelmsford Street on Saturday morning in front of St. Jean d'Arc Credit Union?
Yes.
You have?
Yep.
It isn't good because the traffic backs up. And as you get closer and closer to the holidays, it's worse. When I mentioned the laundromat, I know it was the building was grandfathered in. I was waiting to get out of the laundromat. The traffic was stopped. It was 12 o'clock noon. There was someone in a pickup truck. He went around the cars. He went into Feeney's parking lot, went up over the curb to get to CVS because he didn't have any patience to wait. That should tell you something. Maybe we should have cameras down there. You're aware as well as I am, the state would not give a turning lane in front of the Skip's property because they didn't want to. What are we going to do down the other end? How are we going to avoid really serious accidents happening? I don't know. But I don't know how much more we can absorb as a neighborhood because this is affecting our neighborhood. And if you live there on a daily basis, you would know that. It's that bad. And I did come to the meetings, and I am aware we need to develop the town. But, as you said, 68% of this town is residential. That being said, if all this transpires, do we all get an abatement on our taxes? Because we won't be able to sell our houses. It will decrease our property values. And I thank you for listening, Jim.
Debbie, appreciate it. Michael.
Good evening. Mike Kowalik, 9 Whipple Tree Road. 2 comments, I'll be done, and it's really reflective of discussions we had with the Economic Development Committee. One is, when we look at businesses, what they look for is consistency. And so when we look at the implementation plan and the importance of it, it's the importance of the town maintaining and sticking to the master plan. During some of the meetings over the last couple of months, I had heard where some officials said, well, maybe I won't adhere to the master plan. I think as part of the implementation committee, that's really not an acceptable attitude to have. Changes will happen, things will change over time. When it comes about strategic planning, is the one certainty is that it will be wrong at some point in time. Is if we do want to change, there has to be some process where we document the reasons for the change. Jim, we talked about a silly example of, say we wanted to paint all the buildings blue in Chelmsford. That was going to be our new color. But 3 years down the line, we found out that blue was the most toxic pigment. And now we have to change to green. But that somehow should be documented in the master plan as an addendum in the change. So that's what we're looking for is we do adhere to the master plan and changes are not made or ignored, they're made with documentation. Second point about redevelopment. Redevelopment is so crucial in this town, and it's not about more parking spaces, it's about redeveloping properties. In our discussions with a lot of the commercial brokers, when we talk about our high vacancy rates, they talked about the viability and the structure of our space as not being Class A space. So unless we really focus on redevelopment and encourage landowners, to redevelop their properties and bring them up to the new standard, the 21st century standard, not the 1970s standards, we will continue to have these vacancy rates because businesses are not going to move into substandard space. So redevelopment and encouraging it is absolutely crucial. So it's more of an emphasis than a change in the documentation. Thank you.
So Michael, just 2 responses. As I had told you when you had given your analogy about blue paint, we have the provision in the implementation plan to make changes. It needs to follow a process, which would be the implementation committee would need to go back to the planning board to draft that addendum. And the planning board would need to rely on town council or bylaw review or NEMCOG or whoever they would need as a consultant if they needed help, depending on what that was that needed to be changed. That could be timelines, that could be blue paint to green paint, whatever analogy you want, but there is a provision in there as the document matures through the next 10 years. The second item that you had was relative to redevelopment, and I want to make sure you understand it, that this committee was very conscientious of we are going to be faced with more redevelopment than development because we have limited open space. With that being said, this committee had consensus that it was 1 square foot for 1 square foot, and that if it was anything over that, suppose 1 square foot for 1.5 square feet, that it would be fully mitigated and looked at as to why that was necessary, and that the bylaw revision would be drafted so that the best interest of the town characteristics was taken into place. So this committee was very conscientious of if you have a 100,000 square foot building and it comes down, that it's a 100,000 square foot building that goes back up.
And again, I'm talking more about emphasis, and I agree with that. So like I said in my preamble, it's not about creating more parking spaces or creating more space. It's encouraging the redevelopment of what is not Class A space. And we will continue to have those vacancies unless we somehow encourage the landowners to bring it up to speed. Not necessarily make it bigger, not necessarily have more parking spaces, but encourage them to upgrade their buildings from a look and feel standpoint. And again, it's more from a consistency standpoint about the implementation, is that members of any committee or board shouldn't feel that they have willy-nilly, well, I just won't follow this part of the master plan. If they don't want to, they need to document as to why they're not following it.
Right. Thank you. Joanne?
Hi, Joanne Anderson, 6 Evergreen Street. First of all, I want to thank the committee for all the work that you guys must have put into this, and now looking at the thickness of that book, I know why I couldn't make it through the whole thing. So I tried to focus on a couple of things, and I have a few questions. I was wondering if somebody could give me the definition of a pad site. What does that mean?
Evan, you want to give that definition for us?
Pad site, as referenced in the master plan, refers to taking a large property and then creating new lots that have direct frontage and access off of the main road.
Thank you.
Now, you might want to stay here, because I have a few more questions. I would like to know how the addresses chosen as the pad sites were chosen. Could you answer that?
I believe for the property that we're contemplating, yep, that particular property is one of the largest properties along that corridor that appears to have potential for the development of pad sites.
Jim?
Go ahead, Dave.
I think the reference to pad sites is only that section of property in front of the Chelmsford Mall. I don't
Correct.
think there's a reference anywhere else.
Correct, and that's what I'm focusing on.
One of the concerns of the Master Plan Committee was that without addressing zoning there, technically, whether it's practical or not, the Chelmsford Mall could go right up to Chelmsford Street. And we felt that it was very important that we try to create some screening between the Chelmsford Mall and the residences across the street on 110. And one way to do it is to have what's called neighborhood commercial.
But how long has the Chelmsford Mall been there, as it stands? I mean, I know originally it was like a regular mall, and now it's the individual stores. It's been there for, what, 40 years? In that capacity, I would find it hard to believe that they would decide to come directly up to Chelmsford Street.
You might be very right, but unless you address the zoning, someday somebody might, right?
I guess my question is there anything, another option, say, because I have these papers which were from last fall, done by Concord Square Planning and Development out of Boston, that suggests how to change these sites from shopping center to neighborhood commercial. I don't know if you guys had these as well. And my concern as a member of the Westlands is that by changing these, you put stores within 25 feet of Chelmsford Street with entrances and exits directly on Chelmsford Street where Dalton Road forks off. And I don't know about you guys, but my husband got hit trying to get down our own street on Evergreen Street. My car's in the shop right now because I was rear-ended last week. And constantly, if I've spoken to the chief of police twice recently because people consistently take illegal lefts into the Chelmsford Mall. I spoke to my neighbor who owns 222 Dalton Road, who, by the way, he and his wife are both Chelmsford, longtime residents and town employees. And he said to me, if I knew that there was a chance that there could be businesses put directly on Chelmsford Street, I wouldn't have bought this house. And I think that says something, and that Debbie had mentioned concerns in regards to our property values. The more you develop an area that has bad traffic issues, I think it decreases our property value in the whole area because people look at traffic as a deterrent. Why would you want to live there? But anyways, my questions in regards to the specific pad sites is I did also note that if they were to rezone these to neighborhood commercial, they did, specifically point out things such as they would ask for a 50% reduction in their landscaping. They would want 0 side yards, so they'd basically be right on top of each other. And you would have the whole issue of dealing with dealing with Dalton Road and Chelmsford Street, right where they all abut each other. So I guess, I don't know, is there another option other than calling these pad sites and giving the owners of these properties the ability to then put a business directly on Chelmsford Street? Because let's be real, the owner of the pad site is the Chelmsford Mall, the owner of the Chelmsford Mall. So basically, instead of telling him you have to build the mall on the street, which he's less likely to do, he now could build, and I was told by Evan, they could build whatever they wanted. They could put Dunkin' Donuts there. They could put anything they wanted, which I think would just make things that much worse.
So Joanne, I just want to make a couple of things clear to you. The Concord Square study that you're referring to was brought to our attention. It is not part of the master plan document. Matter of fact, it was pretty contentious amongst this group.
Thank you. I appreciate
not
that.
to include it. What we had recommended in there, which is also part of the recommendations, was some type of transitional buffer zoning. And there were 2 areas that came to mind that immediately stood out. One was to the benefit of the Hyders on between Kidder and Chamberlain, where they abut an industrial site there, and they've had some ongoing issues. And we have no provision for any type of landscape buffering between a residential and industrial or residential and commercial type neighborhood. So you'll see in the recommendations there that we do have a recommendation that that's incorporated as part of a bylaw review. That was also true for the Westland section, particularly where you're talking about with those pad sites. One other thing that was a concern as we went through this process was what used to be Ted's Beer and Wine, which is now no longer a business, and the potential that somebody could buy that and possibly come back and combine that with the pad sites without having some type of a buffer zoning between the residential side of Chelmsford Street in the Westlands and the Chelmsford Mall. And those were the concepts that we took into place, but we're hearing you loud and clear about the commercial development there. The Stop and Shop site, if we're talking about that, that's pretty far along in the process, and it's probably pretty certain it's going to be built on. So I don't know how much will be. The Katrina Road, which Debbie had mentioned, again, that's a building for a building. There's some cleanup that needs to be done there as well. It's owned industrial there. I think is it IA down there? Yeah, it's IA. So, that zoning would stay in place, but it's an important part of what we're trying to do from a long-term strategic plan, because it abuts the bike trail, and it also, right now, the town owns it, and there's some cleanup that needs to get done to it. Nobody's paying any tax base on it, and it's not a usable property the way it sits today.
Yeah, I wasn't overly concerned about Katrina Road.
No, I know what you're concerned about.
And I did speak to the owner of the house, 271 Chelmsford Street. He owns 271, 273, and 275, and the point that he made to me was, if I wanted to go and rezone my property, I have every right to do so. I go to the appropriate boards, I take it to town meeting. Why does the master plan feel the need to put this into the master plan, thereby making it, basically telling the owners of those sites, we're going to give you the green light, go ahead and do this? Because I think if you put this in here, we will see businesses all along Chelmsford Street on those sites. Don't you agree?
I don't know if that's true. It could. I mean, the potential's there. They would need to go through the same process, which is going to town meeting and getting a rezoning. That the process doesn't change whether it's in the master plan or not. So the individual that told you for those addresses, that if they wanted to, they could go and attempt it, absolutely. I mean, I guess anybody could do that.
But I guess by putting it into the master plan, you're basically saying the town agrees that this is a good idea.
It was a conceptual thought, yeah.
Jim, George Zaharos over here. One of the thoughts is to put it in there so that in the future, if that owner decides to sell his land to someone that wants to develop it, I think we were trying to take a proactive approach in looking at it and say, okay, let's try to get something in place so we don't have something that's gross, that we have some control of what could happen there, and study it further, so that way, we don't end up with something that's out of place. Because we have a great concern for that neighborhood and for Dalton Road and Evergreen and all that Westlands area, because we know the traffic that goes through there. So I think we looked at it in the sense that we tried to get it in there to identify it, to get greater control. On the Concord Square development report, the planning board reviewed it, did not endorse it, and I personally have quite a few reservations with some items in there, particularly the zero setbacks. Okay, I think setbacks for residential neighborhoods should be greater. In some instances, they indicate it should be less. So there's some things in there that I don't agree with as a planning board member. But in getting back to the master plan, we try to identify those so we have some control of things. Maybe we don't do anything. Maybe we just leave it alone. But I think it's to try to gain a greater control.
This may not be a question that anybody on the master plan can answer, maybe Evan can, but has there been any thought by the town of Chelmsford to attempt to purchase that land using community preservation funds to create open space, which it basically is now? It's currently trees and grass, as opposed to making these pad sites that businesses could go on. Do you know the answer to that?
Evan, I don't think you need to get up for that.
Okay.
With community preservation funds, as you probably know, there's 3 uses that you can use it for. Open space, right? Open space recreation, historical preservation, right? Or housing, affordable housing is the other component. So yes, they could buy it, but it would have to be maintained as open space. I don't know what the town would see as a use for that. In open space, it's not a place that you'd put a park or anything like that. I don't know. I'm thinking of the reasons that the town would purchase that to keep it open, other than just
Originally,
that
they all
there was
had
no
houses
development
on
on
them.
it. They'd eventually have houses on
They
it?
had houses on
Oh,
them.
right,
The houses were
right.
all torn down.
Right.
Why not the town could purchase them and make affordable housing on them, as opposed to, I think the neighbors would be more likely to want to see housing as opposed to business, and housing wouldn't create traffic, except for the person who owns the house. It may not be optimal for the person who buys that house, but if you make it affordable housing and you create some landscaping to buffer the mall, it might be a better option.
That's a good recommendation. Thank you.
My last thing that I wanted to ask, there were 2, I'm sorry, there's 2 more. One is I was wondering what the definition of, incentivized redevelopment zoning, I've never heard of it.
Beverly, you want to take that one?
Basically, the term incentivize means that you provide some things within your zoning bylaw that make it attractive for a developer to redevelop a property. For example, in exchange for redeveloping a property, and we basically specify in there that this redevelopment would occur using specific design guidelines and criteria that the town creates so that you get the quality and the style of development that you want. But in exchange for redeveloping this property, which redeveloping older properties is often complicated and difficult for a developer, the developer is given an incentive which might include relief from parking requirements or some amount of relief from landscaping requirements. One of the challenges of many of these older properties is by the time you look at the town's requirements under their current zoning bylaw, the developer finds that he can't comply with all the requirements that are there in terms of the parking requirements and the landscaping requirements, because years ago, we weren't such an automobile-dependent society, and we didn't need to fit all these vehicles within a parking area. So this is basically granting a developer some relief from some of those requirements in exchange for following specific design guidelines that ensure that the town is going to get the quality of development that they're looking for.
Right, thank you. And my last question is, I was looking under the economic development opportunities. I was curious, I saw a statement there that says specifically that it's stating it represents the view of the Community Development Department and not the Master Plan Committee. Why would you put something in the master plan if it doesn't express the view of the master plan committee?
I think, if I'm not mistaken, is that section refer to the 2008 Economic Development Plan?
Yes?
I believe it does.
Yes, apparently it does.
So you understand, that plan, first of all, wasn't endorsed by the
Okay.
planning board or anybody else. That's a plan that the Community Development Department has in their possession and they've used, and I believe, I don't want to speak for Evan, but I believe you were instrumental in producing that, Evan. So the Master Plan Committee didn't necessarily agree with everything in there, and that's the reason that that disclosure is in there.
Okay. And
One of similar to why the Concord Square study is not in there.
And I want to thank you for removing 280 and 284 Chelmsford Street from the master plan, because myself, all my neighbors, and everybody in the Westland worked very hard back in 2007 to not have that be rezoned, and I would hate to see it in there, because I know it would come up at town meeting again. Thank you.
And that was, Joanne, really, that was merely an oversight. We, meant to go back. It was a site that when it was mentioned, we were adamant about taking that out. And it had...
Because you knew I'd be back.
We had already heard it with the planning board, so we knew what the feeling was, but also, it's listed in the land use and zoning as a potential redevelopment for residential, because there's a vacant lot there, right?
Okay. Thank you.
Maybe you should put under the housing section as well, that's on page 48, just to kind of bring all that together. You recommend that the properties on Littleton Road from Hunt Road to Chamberlain Road be addressed as part of that redevelopment district. And the question, my wife has zoning question mark, but then when will some of the zoning bylaws be written to reflect the changes in the master plan on page 39 of the land use? I can give you time if you want to, but my only other question that I actually just scribbled down while I was sitting back here, in regards to the Kidder Road, and I know you guys and ladies have done a lot of effort, and we appreciate it. Again, I thank you very much from not only the bottom, but the top of my heart. We're actually looking forward to a night's sleep tonight. Kidder Road has gone empty as of earlier today. They've finally pulled out. The dirt doctor is gone. So we're happy, but we're also very scared because now we have no idea what's going to go in there. I know there's a white truck already backed in. I don't even know who owns it. But what I jotted down is on the Kidder Road, maybe rezone the back half of Kidder Road, whether it be heavy industrial, or is there a way that we can keep that almost like, right now it's an area that can't be used like a buffer zone between the residential and commercial. And I know when they come in, eventually they're going to want to do plans. They have that buffer zone of trees that most of you have seen. If there's any way we can keep that, whether I still own the house when I get grayer or whatever, for either myself or the next people that might own it, it would be respectful, I think, to keep that 100-foot buffer, maybe a 100-foot buffer, and never be able to be built. They probably want to throw a retention pond or something in there, but just a thought that, like you added in here, to keep that buffer zone area open.
So Joe, a couple of the questions that you asked relative to the zoning bylaws.
Yep.
That has an immediate time frame to it. The bylaws that we have now are greater than 10 years old.
Yep.
And they need to be gone through extensively. And we actually line item out, use and definition tables in problematic areas within the bylaw that need to be, right to the top surface.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the planning board and the Board of Appeals are not going to be able to do that by themselves. They're going to probably need consulting help and legal help to make that happen. We do have monies available in the implementation plan to go through that process. It would be up to the planning board, how quickly they want to get to that, but it does say in the recommendations that it's immediate, which would be less than 1 year to start working on it. Part of the other recommendations that we make in this, as I had stated earlier, your area was one of the reasons that we looked heavily at transitional zoning, and it bubbled some problems where you've got industrial and commercial zoning that abuts to residential areas. That would be part of the zoning bylaw review, and they would institute that as part of a new bylaw that would have transitional zoning in there with, I would envision it, this is just one person speaking out loud, I would envision it as mature vegetation that has a landscape buffer that would, you know, insulate between any industrial activity that would be going on in the residential neighborhood.
Okay, because we're thinking as it is now, I know they put a pile of probably 600-700 yards of gravel in there, but even still, it's existing, so maybe there's somehow, it could be reviewed as an existing grandfathered in a sense, because you're going to have another problem when Emmanuel develops against the other side of Kidder Road. Those, looking at it from the commercial side, those buildings have been there for roughly 20 years. I don't know exactly without going through each date of each building, but now you got a new development coming in. It's going to be multifamily, and that's going to create an issue for the businesses that have been there for many years. So, you know, I'm stuck on the other side of the coin, as you're well aware, that I'm the residential, the business is moving in on me. Now you have the business that the residential is moving in on them. So it's a tough spot. I'm telling you, all of these, there must a lot of, I know we lose a lot of sleep over, because it's like, how do you be fair to everybody? And if something is already like grandfathered in, it should be respected. Like I say, the 100 buffer on our end. You know, when that Emmanuel project goes in, they're going to be right on top of that Crane guy and a couple of them companies there.
And it's important to note, I mean, the root cause of what happened to you was there was no building that went in there. They never applied for a site plan. There was nothing that triggered site plan within the zoning bylaws. So it's definitely an area that's gray. It doesn't say anything about it. And what they were doing was working, as you know, they were working out of a trailer with heavy equipment. And during the snowstorms, they were bringing that heavy equipment in and out.
Yeah, anytime they want.
And those are things that need to be addressed in the bylaw review.
Absolutely. And I see you guys have been obviously reaching, and again, we appreciate it more than you could ever imagine, seriously. And I'm not kissing up to you. I'm telling you the truth. I mean, when 2.5 years we haven't had a decent night's sleep because of what goes on there, and I'm telling you, sometimes I sleep like a rock and I still can't get to sleep. So,
Well, the other thing to note, Joe, is that when the bylaw review happens, there's a public process that needs to be followed there as well. And there'll be public hearings involved so that you'll be able to come and talk and offer input at those as well.
I'll be glad.
Which I'm sure you'll be glad to do.
If I can help, I'll be there. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Good evening, Diane Cloutier, 258 Groton Road. I, too, would like to thank you all for the hard work you've done, and a special thank you to Evan Belansky for getting my husband and our neighbors through this process. We're attending tonight, my husband, as well as a few of my neighbors, in support of recommendation number 16 to address the zoning conflicts that are happening in that little corridor between Route 3 and the Westford Town Line on Route 40. I see that that is a short-term goal in terms of possibly rezoning. We ask that you please make it an immediate goal, and our reasoning for that is my husband and I have polled all the neighbors between Route 3 and the Westford Town Line. We would like to see the single-family homes converted to two-family zoning. This would help us bear the impact of what has happened to our property values over the past few years with everything going on down on that end of Route 40. So primarily, all we're asking is, yes, thank you for doing this, and please, if there's any way to expedite this process, we would certainly appreciate it. And thank you again for all your work.
Thank you.
Roland Van Loo, 6 Hemlock Drive. Jim, your introductory remarks about redevelopment are well taken and they were well articulated. I just do want to emphasize that there are several places that you're aware of from the document that I provided to the committee in the written document that conflict with that, and particularly the housing section really emphasizes through its verbiage the provision of affordable housing through construction rather than through verbs like provision, which would include redevelopment. or subsidy or all of these alternatives. The previous comments about traffic management are well taken. As residents, we really don't want to plan for managing additional traffic. We want to plan for avoiding additional traffic as much as possible. And there are places in the plan where that's not really the tack that's taken. So just be aware of that. And finally...
Roland, can I just
Yes.
ask you, it's just important for us to get some specific areas.
Yes.
Did you happen to highlight the pages? I know you sent us a very detailed analysis.
Yes.
Was there anything else that you wanted to highlight other than what was in the analysis?
No, the analysis is basically it. But the analysis doesn't specifically call out traffic, so I just wanted to mention that as one of the goals for an emphasis on redevelopment is that the impact on traffic is less than new development. Now, it would seem to me that the fundamental guiding principles haven't changed since 1996. And in fact, the committee explicitly states in the letter to the residents that the guiding principles that advise against urbanization and advise to try to retain the rural characteristics of the town, et cetera, that those guiding principles are important and were in fact used by the committee in trying to make decisions, et cetera. So my question to the committee is, why was it considered important and even desirable to remove them from the draft itself? I know everyone on the committee understands that if you send a contract to someone, a written document, and you include a cover letter, the cover letter in no way modifies the contract or becomes part of the contract or in any way constrains the contract. So my question to the committee is, why did you remove those guiding principles from the master plan?
So,
It's not a rhetorical question.
I can respond to that. So I don't think that the intent was to remove them. I think with this committee, what we intended to do was to accentuate them, put an exclamation mark on them with a letter to the residents, but your point is well taken. I think specifically in the land use, housing, and open space section, there's an opportunity for us to go back and revisit conceptually what's in the letter as guiding principles and sprinkle that back through the document with some, take it and insert it in the right areas in the document. Part of what happened with this process is you're working on individual sections, and you get those done and you move on to the next section, and we didn't really get to see it all put together until the last couple of weeks. And
Yes.
your point's well taken. I think that we need to go back and talk about it as a committee to see exactly how we can put that in the document, because you make a good point. You make a good point. So we need to take a look at that.
I think it would be a simple matter to place those guiding principles back in the document so that they have weight. They have no legal weight, as you know, if they're removed from the document. It's important that they be put back in. If you want to accentuate them in a letter, I think that's wonderful. That will kind of force the committee to, and anyone else who examines the master plan, to more carefully examine the conflicts of those guiding principles with things like the 5- and 6-story development proposals, things like that, that will have an enormous impact on traffic. All of these things are related, so I don't need to rehash them. But the housing section in particular, right now, emphasizes congruence with the Chelmsford Housing Authority's proposals to build new housing on open space owned by the town using 40B. You need to really look at that if you want to reduce conflict in the town of Chelmsford. Because to put the imprimatur of the master plan on that concept is not acceptable to the majority of residents, as you will find. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your input. I did want to just make sure I clarified one thing.
Yes.
When you talk about 5 and 6 stories, 4 stories in a commercial environment right now is allowed by right in the town of Chelmsford, per our bylaws. This was one area of town, just so the general public understands. It was the 129 corridor from the Billerica line to Alpha Road that we had put that recommendation in there. The purpose for that was so that we could limit any expansion out and contain the loss of any open space in that area. It's an area that doesn't have any residential components to it because Alpha Road actually stops right by Kronos. And that was the reason for it. The intention of the committee, it was based on a suggestion that came in during business input. The reason that the committee thought through it and put it in there was because they thought it was an opportunity to add more green space or have more green space and have the potential of having 2 additional stories. The one concern there was many concerns, but public safety obviously was the first concern. Do we have the proper fire apparatus to fight a fire for 2 additional stories? Do we have the building codes to support it? Because you're adding 2 additional stories to what's allowed in zoning by right. The answers to those questions, as well as the police department, where there were no concerns with them, and we did have the apparatus to do that. But we can certainly go back and revisit it.
Yeah, your remarks are well taken, and I believe I understand them. I want to encourage the committee to examine the fact that there will not be zero traffic impact outside of the localized area. You know what I mean? If you encourage more urban-style development, which this is, you're going to get more urban-style traffic. It's going to happen. So, to think that people are just going to all get off of Route 3 and not impact Chelmsford Center is not true.
Just one other clarification. If you read that section carefully and closely, you'll see that there is also language in there that says that the density of the development would not increase, that basically we would allow higher structures in exchange for providing more green space. So the traffic generation numbers wouldn't change. It would be the same as what you have there now. You'd have the same square footage in terms of building, but a smaller building footprint and more green space.
Right, and it's an explicit endorsement of planning to build and expand. That's precisely my point. It's not a good plan, because you're going to get increased traffic. I can see you disagree, but I need to make the point.
I mean, a 50,000 square foot building is 50,000 square feet, whether you put it in 4 stories or 6 stories. We're saying we'd prefer to see the 50,000 square feet in 5 or 6 stories so that the footprint of the building is actually smaller, but the traffic generation for 50,000 square feet is the same, no matter how many stories you spread it out over.
There's no question about that. And the emphasis on redevelopment is good, and there's plenty of space in that corridor to be redeveloped at this point in time. There's no need in this particular master plan to say we need to allow for newer, bigger buildings. There's an enormously high vacancy rate. Why are we talking about newer, bigger buildings? It doesn't make sense to us.
If I may observe, one of the reasons that there's so much empty space is that the buildings represent business and industry as it existed 20 years ago, with large manufacturing firms like Digital, Compaq, and others. Those conditions do not exist today. We are looking for smaller companies who can come in and occupy pieces and parts of a building, but yet still work together in a common technology. The land that we're talking about, if you can have a few, and I'm saying a few, more tightly built structures instead of more sprawl. If you look at an aerial photograph of that region, and I live there, by the way, if you look at that, you'll see that a large amount of the area today is parking garage. There's parking lot after parking lot. If you drive by during the middle of the workday, most of that parking lot is empty today. Still groundwater problems, pollution problems, all of those things are there. You'd like to get them moved. You can concentrate it, put some more green space between things. I think you wind up with a much better environment.
You're still talking about new construction. I don't understand where the existing structures go in that plan that you just articulated, and it's not addressed in the master plan.
I understand.
Okay,
all right, but
I'm
again,
just making that point.
we're
It would be
trying
nice to
to-
address it.
Okay, but I am trying to trade off, or we were trying to trade off, I believe, and it's really for Jim to say, but we're trying to trade off between the idea of concentrated development and dispersed development. Right now, we have a lot of buildings that are underutilized, they are architecturally underutilized, they need to be rebuilt.
Right, and I feel like I'm not being heard when I say we'd prefer less development.
I
As opposed
understand
to
that completely.
planning for better development, we'd prefer to plan for less development. Less development is better development.
I don't want to speak for Jim and the committee, but again, if the development reduces the number of buildings and reduces the square footage, then you come out ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I don't think four-story buildings really indicate that you're willing to keep us a suburban community and not urbanize us. But that's just from what I heard in the last few minutes. Have you ever heard of the Westlands Watchdogs?
Yes, I think we've all heard that.
All right. Well, a lot of us are here tonight, and we're telling you not to expand any businesses in the Westlands or along the Westlands borders. We are sick and tired of the crime from parking lots, the break-ins to our homes, the break-ins to our cars, and none of that is ever addressed in this. We have to be safe and free from criminals and thieves, and expanding commercial development, where most of the thieves come from in the parking lots, and if they're not successful there, intimidating people like myself. I've been intimidated quite often at the Walmart mall by people begging for money. I feel very sorry for them, but they're quite intimidating when they need gas and food. And I think that this master plan does not address that issue. But I want you to know the Westland Watchdogs are watching you, and we do not want crime in our neighborhood. And you have to do something about it, not just ignore it. And the other part that I want to talk about is the Stedman Street, Smith Street, Parkhurst Road area. As you know, the traffic on that road is outrageous. The speeding is terrible. I live at the top of the hill on Smith Street at the Stedman Street end. Sidewalks have been put in, which I am very grateful for. I love sidewalks. But they've narrowed the street, and the street has public transportation on it. And we cannot get down the street safely, those of us who drive safely. The winter time is coming. The road is not sanded immediately. It should be sanded immediately. They have to gun their cars to get up the hill in front of my house. There have been numerous accidents there. I'm tired of elderly people standing out in the street trying to stop the traffic from going down the hill and getting in an accident, because as you go down the hill, you cannot control your car. I called the police department. They told me to call the DPW. I said, don't bother, the truck and the cars have all crashed into the bus. You'll be here soon enough. The traffic in that area is terrible. Everyone tries to avoid Drum Hill by coming down Parkhurst Road, which will be a great disaster once they repair it and make it eliminate the hairpin turn. The reason the traffic got waylaid down there was they had to put the sewering in both Lowell and Chelmsford, and the detour directed everyone down Smith Street, and everyone found out, oh, this is the shortcut to the back of Drum Hill. It has to be taken care of. I did complain that there was only one 30-mile-an-hour sign at the bottom of Smith Street onto Parkhurst, and the town manager the very next day had a new sign up, and I appreciate that. The sign that was buried in the senior citizen housing was moved out so that people can see that it's a 30-mile-an-hour traffic zone. The other issue that I have with that is the pollution of Black Brook. When I first moved there 50 years ago, Black Brook was a brook that flowed nicely. It wasn't filled with green slime. The trees hadn't toppled down into the water. It was a climax forest. It was a beautiful place. It looked terrific. Now it's a disgrace. It's a wetlands. It's just terrible looking. All the trees are down, and the pollution is terrible. I noticed that you said the development of Stedman Street in back of Black Brook where the sand and gravel is. That place is so polluted, you will take years, thousands of years, to get the pollution out of that area. When the man who owned Drum Hill tried to build a Home Depot there, he could never build anything there because of the cyanide, from 1 cyanide monitor to 15 now. The landfill, of course, touches Chelmsford, and that's where the cyanide comes from. There must be some way, some grant, something you can do to find out, make a solution to return Black Brook on Smith Street to its original condition and to clear up the back of Black Brook, the back of the Drum Hill area where the sand and gravel was. There are 2 beautiful lakes there that I've seen on your maps, and I didn't realize they were as large as they are. And there used to be animals there. I complained about the backup of Black Brook and the flooding all along Stedman Street. The houses, as you head towards Chelmsford Street, all their backyards are disappearing. They're being flooded. I know that Blackberry Lane, the people had to have double cellars because of the amount of water pouring into their basements. So I think that that whole area, it has to be mentioned more than we have a town that has Black Brook in it, and along with the other brooks. Something concrete has to be done to eliminate the pollution in Chelmsford caused by Lowell. The sluice on Stedman Street has been closed. There are no beaver underneath the culvert on Route 3. They don't live in cyanide-filled waters, as I've told you all before. And I think that you really have to take charge of that particular area and have some concrete solution, some grants that you've applied for to get rid of toxic waste. A simple solution would be to, for me, I'm finished with that issue, would be to put a left-hand arrow onto Parkhurst Road from North Road. It is very difficult because of the timing of the lights to make a left-hand turn onto Parkhurst Road at the lights at Parkhurst Road. It takes a very long time, so I think a short left-hand signal arrow would be very helpful there. Invasive species. My yard and trees are covered with invasive species of Oriental bittersweet. I think that you have mentioned it in your master plan, which I appreciate very much. I would just suggest that 5 years ago I had no Oriental bittersweet. It is on Smith Street. And I think that the plan that you come up with, and I appreciate that you're thinking about doing that, would be available to private citizens as well as the town. And I also don't think voting places should be changed until they're completed. At the Westland School, it was disastrous, this past voting at precinct 6 and 4. I don't know if that's it covered in your master plan, but they should not have changed that site. Many elderly people were very confused. They did not know where the handicap entrance was. The police officer at first didn't until I pointed it out. So I think that you really and truly have to not change voting places and make them accessible to everyone easily. Either, if it's going to continue that way for the November election, and it's not going to be finished, and there's still going to be muck and mud there, and lack of guards, I think that the, somebody from the town clerk's office should stand out in front of this Westland School and help people. Well, thank you very much for allowing me to express my opinion, and thank you.
Thank you. Just before you step away, can we get your name and address?
Yes, Mary Ann, M-A-R-I-A-N-N-E, Peresky, P as in Peter, A-R-E-S-K-Y, 10 Smith Street, Chelmsford, and I'm a Precinct 6 town meeting rep.
Thank you, Mary Ann. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Jim, could I add just a comment?
Yes, absolutely.
Because we've heard a couple of good feedbacks from the Westlands neighborhood, and what I'd like to express, I think on behalf of the committee, is that we did take a careful look at Westlands, not just because of the watchdogs, although certainly, you know, that always filters in the back of our minds, but we did hear feedback. People from Westlands came to our public input sessions throughout the process, and so, you know, we specifically, in the master plan, even though we weren't trying to single out that neighborhood, but they're in a unique situation where they're sort of, you know, buffered by or surrounded by Route 3, 495, Chelmsford Street, North Road. It's a very, I guess, neighborhood that has a lot of surrounding commercial and highway uses. So we were trying to be cognizant of that fact, and we specifically talk about the Westlands and needing to look at when the planning board does their review of the zoning bylaws, see if there's ways we can enhance the protection for neighborhoods like Westlands. We talked about things like the town having to do a better job with zoning enforcement, because all of us have experienced issues with that, and I know Westlands went through a recent issue on a zoning enforcement situation. We looked at the Chelmsford Mall from the perspective of what could happen down the road. About 10 years ago, that mall almost went dark. It was more than half vacant, and our concern was what could happen with a CD site that large, and we looked at transitional zoning to try to maybe do the front neighborhood commercial, not because we wanted necessarily see further development, but we wanted to try to, like we did on Kidder Road, create transitional zoning so that you wouldn't see hard commercial right next to residential. The 280 Chelmsford Street, even though somehow it got into the economic development piece, our position was it needed to stay housing, and maybe that would be a good place for maybe even some affordable housing. So I just don't want anyone to feel, because, you know, there might be one or two sections that, geez, what do they mean by this, that we weren't being sensitive to some of those issues that we know that those neighborhoods do face.
Yes, from that overpass on Parkhurst Road, all the way to Chelmsford Mall, do not put another commercial thing in there. We're a wonderful neighborhood with lots of children, and we do not want our safety impeded. Thank you.
In addition, I just want to say one thing, is these are recommendations. The planning board is going to go back and do, for their sections, deeper studies, more intense studies, hold public hearings. I mean, we know about the Westlands. We know that the side between Stedman and down to the Moolises, that side there, is just about all residential, and it should remain residential. We clearly see that. We clearly know that. So the planning board will hold public hearings on any zoning change or bylaw change that comes forward. So this is not stone here, including the 5 and 6 stories that was mentioned here. That the planning board will debate that issue, hold public hearings, and then if the planning board thinks it should move forward, then it will come to town meeting for vote at town meeting. So this is not a rubber stamp. It's not going to be the gospel. Okay, so I just want to make sure that's clear, that these things will be studied further. You know, so right now we're trying to get input on it, see if we should tweak something or fix something. So, all right?
Yes, because both of you spoke, I thought of 2 more things, but I don't want to talk about them now. I want to let the rest of the people talk, and I hope that I could come up again.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ann.
Hello, my name is Laura Merrill. I live at 7 Dunshire Drive, and I'm also lead steward at the Deepwood Brook Reservation up in North Chelmsford. I am here right now. I basically ran over here about 10 minutes ago because I expected the town officials that were elected and appointed to be protecting the interest of this town for me while I was home raising my family. And unfortunately, everything that I've been reading in the papers, and it's just not happening. I grew up in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. It was a small farm town when I grew up. We used to play in the field that was a big, it was a barn, which was then leveled, and digital came in. Since then, Shrewsbury has developed and developed and developed, and now it is a giant strip mall. You can't get from one end of it to the other, and every little bit of land has been bought up. There's no planning to any of you can't get anywhere. The houses don't look alike. I was there in the high school when they had to start adding the portables onto the high school. Right now, my kids are in Harrington, and we've all seen that we've had to close the school a few years ago. Everybody's reduced down. The classes are getting bigger. I do not think that Chelmsford is planning for what is going to happen if you expect to bring all of these families in and put them into apartments. We're not going to have the schools to support them, and our kids are going to suffer. I have straight-A students. I have them in this town because this town reminded me of Shrewsbury when I grew up. And I am absolutely astounded at how much the last 5 years has been given away to everything that I thought this town stood for. I met you, Dave, 3 years ago, and there you were fighting for every little bit of free space. And the last 2 weeks, I can't believe what I've seen in these meetings. You've got to stop building, you've got to stop putting industry in, you've got to fill the vacancies, and you've got to stop bringing in families just because you think it fits the bill. It's not going to work. It's just going to make this place another urbanized, horrible place to live, and we're all going to have to go move to Vermont. I don't want to move to Vermont, but I don't see any other reason to stay here if this is what the planning board is going to present to us. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Is there anybody from the committee that wants to respond or add? Sheila?
I appreciate deeply what the last speaker had to say. I live in Chelmsford. I expect to live in Chelmsford for many years in the future. And one of the factors throughout this whole project was to try to keep Chelmsford in the characteristic in each area that it is currently. We want Chelmsford to remain with the certain characteristics of village feel, family neighborhood feel, but yet we do have to have some type of industry in here to be sustainable at all. But I do want to emphasize to the Chelmsford public that we would put ourselves in certain neighborhoods when we were talking about the neighborhoods. We know, this group knows Chelmsford pretty well, and we would all say to ourselves, and I believe I'm correct in saying that, if we did this, if we recommended zoning like this, would we want to live in this area? We all put ourselves in your position as much as we could. And I just want to emphasize that we were very sensitive to the issues of daily life for each family in this community. So I hope that when you read through the plan, you will see that very clearly. Thank you.
All right, name and address, please.
Ken Skelly, 14 7th Street, Western Watchdog. I want to thank all you guys for all your hard work. I really appreciate it. And Phil mentioned this a second ago, but I want to call attention to item 26, reinstatement of the position of a zoning enforcement law. We just went through this issue in 7th Street, 12 is right next to us, and I know that Evan Polanski's team is overworked, and trying to get them to do both jobs it's not fair to him, and it's not fair to the town. So I'd like to go from immediate to now, if that's a possibility. Yesterday. And the only other thing I'd say, I mean, you've heard all these things, but I know you guys are thinking about this, and you've said you've thought about, especially that Westlands area where it's particular, where it's surrounded by all the highways and the major roads. But, we just ask, and I don't mean to be flip, but, please don't let 110 turn into a Tewksbury Route 38, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Roy Early, E-A-R-L-E-Y, 184 Chelmsford Street, town meeting rep in the Westlands. I moved into Chelmsford 15 years ago onto Chelmsford Street, not because I like traffic or the Best Western, or the Ground Round, actually, that was an incentive at the time. But what I'm saying is I moved to Chelmsford Street because it was my affordable housing at the time. And at the time, it was our starter house, and thanks to the economy, it's still our starter house 15 years later. But only a few short years from now, we'll have paid off the mortgage on our starter house, and we probably will want to stay there. And what I just want to emphasize is to the master plan that when the wording actually gets put in print, because of situations we've gone through in the past year, that the wording be in black and white, so there'll be no misunderstanding 5, 6, 8 years from now when some developer comes on my side of the residential side of Chelmsford Street and suddenly wants to build commercial businesses or whatever next to my house and says, well, it was the intent of the master plan that, Chelmsford stay residential on that side, but the way it was written, we can do what we want now. So I can't imply to all of you that say what you say, but also write it down so there'll be no misunderstanding in 5, 10, 15 years down the road. Thank you for your work.
Thanks, Roy.
Rich Day, 6 Marola Ave. The concern that I have is the different areas that you're talking about for mixed use, the different corridors and areas in town. I think Littleton Road section between Hunt and the Westford line, and a few other areas where there's what I call conflicts between residential activities and commercial industrial activities, that, there's the new buzzword of mixed use where you seem to be wanting to, and not you per se, but parties seem to want to mix residential with commercial with industrial all in the same neighborhood. We seem to have inadvertently converted that area over the years from the original zoning, which was sort of some multifamily and then some existing commercial and industrial, and then the 40B kind of threw a monkey wrench into the process. And I know Evan's heard this word from me before, but the area is, I call it mongrelization. It's become mongrelized, where you've got a mixture of everything. And bottom line is that these mongrelized areas that are, have impact on the people that end up living there. Air quality, noise, lighting are going to be long-term effect problems for these people. They think that this mixed use is, because it is more of an urban setting, where you have these mixed uses going on, because that's what occurs there, that somehow it's bigger and better and trendy and whatever. But from the issues that occurred with the asphalt plant in other areas, that it wasn't the best thing in the world to move thousands of extra people, residential people, into an area where the air quality is more degraded than other areas in town. I mean, when people move to town, they move to a residential area, they're expecting a certain sort of base background for that residential growth and raising their families and whatever. And they've left the more urbanized cities and whatever to get away from the noise and the air, the traffic and the air quality issues and the lighting and whatever. And I just got to throw it out there that I think, even though I know it's trendy, I just don't know whether it's in the best interest of this town to start thinking about creating these mixed-use things. I know development-wise, I understand what they're looking for, but I don't know if in the best interest of this town and the residents of this town, particularly I find it a little interesting to think that we're going to supply affordable, housing, or more affordable housing to people in the town, but inadvertently, we're not going to really give them a real equal thing to the rest of us, is that we're going to stick them in areas where they do have to be impacted by these environmental factors of that kind of congestion. And, so you're saying, oh, look at this, we've done this for you, but, it's sort of, something that's happening all over. I mean, I understand that, but I just think that it's something that parties have to take a little closer look at, because I don't think the trend, I've seen a lot of different types of trends in development in the town since I've been here, and some have worked out and some haven't worked out, and regretfully, with what I do, I've had my share of interaction with those typical conflicts that will occur between the different types of uses. And therefore, I just wanted to get up and, say to the group that, yes, I understand all the work that's been done, but I think this mixed-use kind of thing can be an issue. And I think in the long run, it can be an issue. So, thank you.
Sure.
Richard, thank you for that comment. Obviously, you and I worked hand in hand when we were dealing with the asphalt plant and their proposed expansion. You don't have to answer tonight, but it might be helpful, given your expertise, if you could maybe just give a recommendation or a suggestion about some type of buffer around a use like that where you wouldn't want to add, let's say, more residential, whether it's quarter of a mile, half a mile. You don't have to, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you could provide that feedback, that might be helpful to the committee.
Sure. No problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Was there any other questions or comments about Mr. D?
Just a quick question. Just out of curiosity, do you see anywhere where mixed use could work?
I think it's been pretty simple. The obvious issue of usage, from the lowest, density to the highest density and or use. The single-family residential, buffering up to the multifamily residential, buffering up to some low-density commercial, very non-intrusive types of commercial, up to the more heavy commercial / industrial, quote-unquote, kinds of activities. So clearly, it's all definable in the fact of, what do you butt up against what? And clearly, I think Chelmsford Street and Littleton Road and a few others where one side of the street is one use and the other side is another use, and they're quite separated, not just abutting uses, but 3 or 4 shades of difference between them. So clearly,
so in some instances it could work.
Yeah, I think
guarded instances.
Yeah, I think there's, on that low end of that scale, that there is some potential room for those kinds of things. Yeah. All right.
So just I have one question. Do you think that mixed use would work, say, in a center village type environment where you have housing on maybe some of the upper floors and storefronts on the lower floors, which we do have some properties like that? That's one question. The second part of that, which is a build off of that, do you see any potential for things like mill overlay, where we could have mixed use on, similar to what we have at the old Gillette Mill, which has now been renovated. We have storefronts, mixed use. You have residential condos on one side, and you have the storefront type mixed use as well as restaurant. Do you think that there's a possibility of that having success on the other mill properties that we have?
I think the obvious issue is that you're looking at what I call the accumulative effect of the scenario that may exist in those particular, any areas around town. You know, you could have one where it's a lot of traffic, a lot of noise, a lot of light, a lot of, degraded air quality, all of them in that one spot, and therefore the residents that are living there are being impacted by, say, all of them, while in other scenarios you may have the opportunity that they're not all there, and therefore a little bit more, acceptable to the, that kind of concept. So the answer is there some, as we talked before, that might exist? Sure. I don't think it's an all or none kind of scenario, but I think it's just a little bit too easy sometimes to jump to, that it fits all the different areas and the redevelopment in those areas. If you can offer, and again, I understand that, if you can offer more flexibility, then there's more likelihood that it will occur. Well, that's great, but where and at what cost?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Merrill.
Good evening, George Merrill, Precinct 2. I live at 108 Dunstable Road, right over there. I'm apprehensive about all the zoning changes you're planning to make. Vinyl Square especially. I'm also a member of the Historic Commission here in town. Any changes you make to Vinyl Square, redevelop, revitalize, will change its historic character. Place is only a couple hundred feet long. There's only a half a dozen buildings. Why are you including at least 3 or 4 places in there? We're going to revitalize Vinyl Square. It's already been done. Charlie Parley built a nice building 10 years or so ago, half empty most of the time, but it's a nice building. How would you revitalize the Village Grooming Shop, Pete's Barber Shop? It's been there since the Civil War. Next door, you got Rosie's Diner that used to be PT's Garage. What can you do to that cement building to revitalize it? I don't understand why you want to make changes in Vinyl Square. I think you should leave it alone. The people that own the businesses do their own thing. Rosie's just expanded, and they're vital. What you could do, include in your plan, is parking spaces. Next door to the Village Grooming, that lot was just paved. The town doesn't own it, and I've been after them for 10 years to buy it. But the fellow who owns it must have paved it for some good reason. He's probably a good citizen, I don't know, but that parking lot makes Vinyl Square viable. Across the street from PT's is Bowling Alley. Bowling Alley, I assume, I've done some research on it, one of the oldest duck pin alleys in the United States, if not the oldest, continually operating bowling alley. What can you do to improve that? So I'd like to see Vinyl Square left alone. Also in your plan, under transportation, you call for building a train station in Vinyl Square. If you know the area, you know that's the most impractical suggestion that you could make. Deep Brook runs right down back of the town. Can't build within 100 feet of it. That doesn't leave you much land to put any kind of a facility there. Watton Lane is a 30-degree grade. There's no way you can get traffic up that. It's a narrow road. I can see people trying to get home at 5 o'clock during a snowstorm come up that hill. They wouldn't make it. It's not a practical solution. I'd like you to remove it from the plan. The 66 acres back at the old dump on Swain Road is owned industry, light industry. Now, if you change that to housing, high-density housing, that Mr. Hedison will put in there, and it'll be every last square inch he can get houses on. You'll wind up with another 300 families in there, 900 plus 1,200 people there. Next door, it's a little sportsman's club. Has a shooting range with those little children running around in the yard. How long do you think it's going to take for they're going to try to shut down the little sportsman's club? Leave it industry. I've heard other people talk about we need industry. Plus all those children in the school system. If you force the little sportsman club to disband, they got enough land to put another 300 houses in there. You want those, you're looking at 1,200, 1,500 children in your school system in the next 10 years. You'll be building more schools. If you leave it alone, the sportsman club can exist, and you'll have your industrial space to expand and make industry. My apprehension is, with all these zoning changes you're making throughout town, you will change the historic character of this town. And I've been born here. I'd hate to see that happen. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Do we have anybody that would like to ask questions of Mr. Merrill, or comments?
I think we should, it's a good point that George brought up about the 66 acres. And the committee had concerns about what would you do with that land. Certainly, you know, there were we received input, maybe from the Housing Authority and the Affordable Housing Committee, that might be a place for some residential. We felt that that property was so unique and had such, really needed its own independent review of what should be done or what shouldn't be done. And so one of our recommendations is that that has its own separate study committee. It was really beyond this. This committee could have spent a year just on that 66 acres. So with two sites, we recommended actually that the town study it separately, that site as well as the UMass Lowell West Campus site, because, again, it was a site that had a lot of potential, had a lot of history. Unfortunately, the university has let it deteriorate, which is a shame. There's a lot of buildings there that you might be able to save some of the historic characters of. And so we designated that site also as a site that should have its own study committee. So I just wanted to add that.
Thanks. Just one other note, George, just so you have some clarity on the items with Vinyl Square. There was never any mention in this plan about changing the zoning of Vinyl Square. I think that's what I heard you say. What we propose in here is an overlay zoning where the under zoning that exists today would remain, and the Center Village overlay would sit on top of it to provide additional options for things like facade programs, for things like, as you had mentioned, parking lots. Right now, a lot of those buildings that are in there are limited to what they can do because they're non-conforming, because they were built well before the bylaws were established. One of the mistakes that we noted as we went through this process was a few years back, they put Center Village zoning in Chelmsford Center for a certain segment of it, and it replaced the zoning that was always there. And that's what we didn't want to happen here. We wanted to provide another option that wouldn't relieve the existing zoning, that would allow those businesses to be able to take a look at their facades, maybe through CPC, engage in some facade programs. Those are studies that would need to come as part of these recommendations to help. So when we talked about the revitalization of Vinyl Square, that's a pretty big word. It was always to retain the historic nature of Vinyl Square, but to allow those businesses some options to tap into additional resources that may be available out there, such as CPC.
Well, you weren't planning to change it to village zoning?
No.
No.
And that's, I'm glad you brought it up, because there is a misconception out there that an overlay replaces it. Earlier tonight, you heard me talk about mill overlay for the mills. That's also in here as a concept. Again, that would all need to go through a study, would need to be drafted, and it would need to be presented. But it does not eliminate the industrial or commercial zoning that those mills are today. That is the base zoning. It doesn't change. The overlay just sits on top of it and creates new opportunities.
Would it allow them to add storage to what's there?
It would allow them to only add what the center village zoning, or in this case, the Vinyl Square overlay zoning was written to allow. And that would go through a public process and a public hearing, and you would need to write a bylaw that had some type of village overlay zoning.
I just don't want to see it change.
Right. Got it. Beverly, did I explain that okay? Just
Problems with the road crossings. I'm not sure what exactly could be done about that, but it's worth looking into. The light cycles are short. The times between the lights are long. And at the ball fields, people generally wait for the light to change. However, in the other intersection near Old Town Hall, people generally often cross against the light there. And pretty much everybody complains after going through there. And thirdly, there are wooden railings that go through behind Village Square, and they're continuous railings. And some of the business owners have complained about loss of sales at their businesses because customers can't get through that area. So those would be, just sort of a general improvement of Bruce Freeman Rail Trail through the center would be good. I just want to motivate that.
so that last item, Cynthia, just so I understand, the committee understands, are you proposing that there be some type of a cut into that railing where the Village Square is, so that you could access businesses from the rail trail?
Yes, that's actually been requested by both Subway Sandwich Shop and Zesty Pizza. They both, Subway has seen a decline in their business because they had a lot of business from the professional side, and people can't get across. And people are climbing the railings to get through, and that doesn't seem like the safest thing for people to be doing.
I also work in that area, and we would love to see a break there too, because I work in healthcare, and we have patients that do like to bike in, walk in, and it's a wonderful way to come into that area. Vinyl Square right now has a parking issue also, which helps alleviate, the parking problems. So I think from the businesses other than Zesty's and the convenience store, I believe that would be a very good improvement.
Yes, the issue there is, as you mentioned, the limited number of parking spaces, although it's pretty much asphalt wasteland on the weekends. It's parked full
It's very busy during the week.
Yes, and the other thing is that any entrance would need to be ADA compliant, handicapped accessible. Subway did say that they would be willing to lose a parking spot in order to have a break in the fence there, just because then they felt they would see an increase in business. So they did make an official request to the town for that.
Jim?
Yes, Dave.
Cynthia, those two recommendations are very, very specific to be put into a master plan. Can't BPAC make those two things happen?
No, the recommendation is simply to improve.
Can't BPAC make those two things happen on your own? Can't you get the town to make cuts in the rail trail fence? Can't you get the town to address the the traffic light sequencing?
Well, that would be a BPAC. I'm speaking as a...
But can't BPAC do that? I know you're on BPAC.
Yeah, I would suppose so, but there are other things under improvements that, would be under the charge of the town or the BPAC or whatever that, you could say they could do. So it's just, the recommendation is not the specific things, it's just to improve the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail through the center of Chelmsford. The specific items were just provided as examples of why that is needed. And there may be additional things that could be looked at as well. And then the second thing I have is that although I think the analysis is all very good and everything in there, the transportation section is very nicely done. Everybody's obviously done a very nice job on it and put a lot of work into it. And also there's been a lot of collaboration with members of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, which is appreciated. That the sections with analysis really focus on motorized vehicles, so the count data is for motorized vehicles, and the functional classification information, it would be helpful if it included things like roadway, bike lane mileage, and roadway sidewalk mileage. I realize that these kind of things probably can't be added at this point, but it would be helpful to have that. It's difficult, it's useful to have data in order to try to do planning and make decisions. And so that would have been helpful for the, for bicycle and pedestrian planning. And then the other thing is that, so the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee had requested analysis of 4 high priority, 6 medium priority, and 3 low priority intersections with respect to bicycle and pedestrian issues. And all of those were analyzed, which was really excellent. However, they were all analyzed strictly from the perspective of motorized vehicles, and it had been the intent to have them also analyzed from the perspective of bicycle and pedestrian access. And because it was realized that, that could be more work, that's why things were broken down into the 3 categories. So the analysis, it would have been helpful to have that analysis. And I know that, it's been said, well, there are things in the other section that have issues and recommendations. However, the data that would come from that would be useful. And also, especially like the bike lane mileage and sidewalk mileage in town would be useful data to have. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cynthia.
George Merrill again, just a quick follow-up. Number 9 on your, it says modify the current zoning bylaw to allow residential uses with retail offices, shops within town center and Vinyl Square. There's no apartment houses there now. There was one, the Village Shop, that came down in the 50s, but this would allow them to put that back again.
What's, George, what's above,
Number 9.
yeah, no, I got the number. What's above the Vinyl Square hardware store?
What's on?
What's up on top of it? The upper floors, is that residential in there? Apartments?
I don't,
Your offices.
over the Quick Check, you mean?
No, over the True Value, the hardware store.
No,
right at the
those are
corner.
businesses. There's one apartment there.
Up on the upper floors?
In other words, that's not allowed now?
And what about the building at the across from Adams Corner Variety, where Millie used to have a real estate office there? Are those apartments up there?
Yeah, there's 6 of them in that unit. What you're saying is that's not allowed, if you're going to change it, so it is allowed.
Right, they might be grandfathered uses.
Yeah.
They're probably grandfathered, but this would make them legal, I guess.
But somebody could also build another, not 10-story, but they could build a 3-story apartment building if you change the zoning.
That is, the way this is worded, it's really to allow residential uses above commercial uses. So if somebody, for example, the building where the hardware store is, if they wanted and they used this overlay zoning, they could put apartments up above the hardware store.
Okay, we don't want that. We want everything to stay the same. Thank you.
I'm Linda McLean, and I live on 10 Tanglewood Drive. I want to actually congratulate you all on the work you've done on this piece. It's a tremendous piece of work, and I think I learned a lot about Chelmsford that I did not know, and so I thought it was very successful. I also have been involved with some activities with boards in the town in the past couple of months, and I understand how much time you have to dedicate to doing something like this, so I thank you for your service. Economic development, when I first read that in the first few paragraphs, I was thinking, gee, that sounds like an opportunity for maximizing revenue. But reading this tonight and reading some of the other things in the plan based on the web presentations, I said, okay, manage and direct growth, including redevelopment and new development projects in a manner consistent with the community's character, and ensure that the town's zoning and land use policies and practices are consistent with the approved master plan. Well, I'm not really sure I got a feeling for what you really think the town's character is here. And I would really like to have more detail on that, because I think a lot of people read this and said, this sounds like they don't want to keep Chelmsford a farming feeling community, which is why we moved here and why we want to live here. So I really suggest that you talk about more of what exactly our town character is in a more defined way. In addition to that, it says, ensure the town's zoning and land use policies and practices are consistent with the approved master plan. To be honest, I didn't know what that meant either. I just don't know what that means. I see these lists of recommendations, but they're so general. I have no idea what that means when you're going to do something about it, and I want to know. And I also want to know what order you're going to do them in and what you're going to focus on. So I think when you publish this master plan, I think in addition to that, you should also publish a very defined list of projects and priorities and specifically what it means. We're going to do this project. We need to change the zoning to XYZ. We're going to identify a developer who wants to do this project. Because this is so general, it scares people. It scares me. The overwhelming tone is lovely. I mean, consistent with the town's character, and ensure that everything is consistent with the approved master plan. I don't know what that means, so I'd like to have more detail on that, and I think we should do that. In addition to that, I think these are great, terrific goals. I think the overwhelming message here is that we want redevelopment with zero net building and the protection of open space, and I think everybody here likes that idea. I particularly am interested in the goals of protecting the ribbons of space, creating linkages between open space, as I presently live in an area that has pockets of forests. And I would really like to see those areas develop linkages between them, because we have a lot of protected species living there, and it's a lovely environment, and we want to see it protected. But I have no idea how to do that based on this document, and we need some direction as to how we can, as residents, make this happen as well. So I think that's important. I would like to, since this document is so good and it has so many positive, happy goals in it, I would like to know why in the last 18 months I have rarely seen Chelmsford residents as unhappy with the direction of the town as I have. And I think that as a group you need to think about that, because what I have seen is open space being developed in a very valuable part of the town, and I've also seen the town supporting a monopole, a cell town monopole that has presently 26 zoning variances required to have this tower be put up. Now that to me doesn't say that you're listening to your mission statement. And I would like to know that this is really what you mean when you say it. I think that's pretty much all I have to say, but I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Linda. Does anybody have any comments or questions for Linda?
About what, CPC?
Pardon me?
About acquiring...
No, not for you, Linda. Linda, the speaker.
Do you have any questions about what I said? No?
I would like to just say something
Sure,
quick.
go ahead, Sue.
I'd like you to just keep in mind that our recommendations are moving forward from this point on. And I do agree, there might be clarification that is needed, but I certainly hope that in the future you'll be able to rethink the document and see that clarification.
Oh, I think the document's wonderful. I absolutely think it's wonderful. I just think it's not, you're not being specific enough about what specifically you intend us to do, or you to do, or anybody else in this room. And I also think residents need a little more direction as to how they can also promote some of the recommendations here. And there's no indication about how we can promote the recommendations that we like and we would like to see happen. So I'd appreciate that.
Jim, did you want to address the implementation section?
Sure. And I'm glad, Linda, I'm glad that we gave you an opportunity to come back and say a couple of key words there. The first word is specific. I like to use the word granular. This is a strategic, long-term, 10-year plan for the town of Chelmsford. In here, we make some pretty specific recommendations that our bylaws are no longer useful bylaws and they need to be studied. We understand as a committee what you're saying about getting a little bit more specific. I think I alluded to earlier, if I didn't, I'll do it again. In the letter to the residents, we need to go back and revisit that letter and do a better job of taking those conceptual pieces from the 96 master plan that we used as guiding principles and inserting those into the 3 applicable areas, which I think would address some of the detail that you're looking at. What I want the public to understand, and you as well, Linda, is that we can't get into the specificity of, getting into granular areas such as monopoles and, specific linkages, because it's not the expertise of this board. It lays in other boards. So we put the recommendations out there. The implementation committee now has timelines, and there'll be subject matter experts from each one of those committees that will sit on that implementation committee, and it will be their purview now to make sure that they take it back. The accountability now lays on them and the representatives of those areas, right? And let's pick on conservation for a minute. If Dave has a designee that sits on this implementation committee, which he will, they would be responsible for any of the conservation type recommendations, and they would need to report via the chair or via the representative from that committee at every town meeting on where they are with that implementation.
I understand. What I'm saying is I understand this was your part of the project. What I'm saying is that as residents, we want to know very specifically exactly what's going to come of this, because it is so general. And I don't want to hear a very general recommendation that sounds like something I want to support and then suddenly turns into something that I absolutely think ruins the character of the town. So what I'm saying to you is put something in place where residents have an active opportunity to really understand what some of these recommendations mean and how they can affect them as it's going on.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Jim?
Yes, David.
You understand that almost every one of the major recommendations can only be acted on by an elected body, whether it's town meeting, whether it's planning board, whether it's...
I did not know that.
Whether it's Board of Selectmen. That's why a lot of these are just general recommendations, because we don't know what a specific elected body this year or the planning board in 4 years, because it may be configured completely differently. We don't know how they're going to react to these suggestions.
Well, I would hope that one of the suggestions you would put forth is, as a recommendation in the plan, is being looked at and implemented, that it's sufficiently advertised and discussed, because everyone here has a family, a home, a business. We're all busy, and sometimes things are happening that we're not aware of, and I think we want to make sure that we understand what is going on in town. So that's my request. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Belansky.
Thank you. Evan Belansky, Chelmsford Community Development. I was going to provide some testimony in response to the 17-page analysis, but it's not clear to me whether that was actually submitted as testimony to the master plan committee or not. If it was submitted as testimony, I'd be more than prepared to provide some testimony this evening, or I can do it offline at a future date. Any thoughts on that? Otherwise, I have just some general comments.
I would tell you that based on earlier testimony, and I don't think he's here, but he did email that to me, and he asked that I email that to the rest of the committee, which I did a few days ago. I think everybody on this committee's had an opportunity to go through as much of it as they can in the short time that we had it. So I would tell you that it is testimony that we are reviewing. If you feel comfortable.
I'm just not sure if it's a public document at this point. If it's, I mean, I have a copy of it as well. If it's just testimony that was submitted directly to the master plan committee, then I can provide the testimony offline unless the committee feels strongly that it should be part of the public record. I'm open to it. It's up to you.
Whatever your pleasure.
All right, well, I'll forward that to you in writing. But just some quick insights into the comments that I've heard this evening. It comes as no surprise that many residents do not want change, specifically in their neighborhood. If what has occurred since 1996 is what this community views as no change, meaning trends continued since 1996, then leave the zoning bylaw as it is and leave the zoning map as it is. However, the testimony that I'm hearing this evening is that people don't like what has occurred since 1996. So if that is the case, and what this current master plan is proposing to do is to propose some refinements to the current zoning bylaw for improvements to fix the past mistakes and to ensure a better future. The current zoning bylaw does not provide adequate protection to Chelmsford Street, the Westlands, Vinyl Square. Currently, on Chelmsford Street, in the shopping center district, those property owners have property rights under the current zoning bylaw. Additional development can occur on Chelmsford Street on a vacant property, on existing commercial property. The question is not whether you can stop it, you can't stop it. The question is whether the current zoning bylaw provides the desired result. Design standards, landscaping standards, architectural standards, density, setbacks, and so forth. If you don't think that the last decade and a half has been good results, then I encourage you to look at some of the proposals in the current master plan, which in my view attempt to address those deficiencies. Up in Vinyl Square, the same thing occurs. Although there are very few 2- and 3-story buildings, the zoning allows 2- and 3-story buildings. It's only a matter of time until those property owners or future property owners exercise their property rights. Currently, there's no design guidelines, there's no architectural review, there's little or no landscaping standards, and inadequate parking standards. The concepts that are being proposed as part of the master plan would attempt to address those with some new refinements. So I strongly encourage people to be open-minded, particularly if you don't like what has occurred over the last decade and a half. Couple other points. The proposed master plan does not recommend any zoning creep. It does not recommend increased zoning for a commercial industrial. In fact, what it proposes is to realign existing commercial industrial land and contemplate building it for housing in certain locations in town. And I think the theory there was to try to minimize negative impacts associated with commercial industrial land in particular parts of town. So those were just some of the general comments I had. I think that this master plan represents a change in course. In my perspective, it's a change in the right direction, but people need to acknowledge and understand that what has occurred over the last decade and a half is not in the town's best interest, and I think that's why it took almost 2 years for this master plan to develop and come to the conclusion this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Evan. Sean?
Good evening. I'd like to thank the Master Plan Committee members for all of your time and effort try and bring Chelmsford forward. I'm also encouraged by the first page of your overview document here, where you are recalling the fundamentals of the 1996 master plan. The third bullet item under that is maintain sufficient natural areas so that open space and plant species can be sustained. Now, I'm not quite sure if this relates to item 51 on your recommendation list, strengthen conservation and preservation initiatives with town bylaws and regulations. If it does, I can't see that this would be a short-term time frame. It should be immediate. Simply because open space and land and habitat are disappearing at such a rapid rate. After a brief inquiry at the town hall, I tried to request a priority map, and nobody seems to know what I was talking about. And, a priority habitat map. And I was kind of concerned because I couldn't find a listing of Chelmsford within the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program website. The reason I tried to inquire about this was, and I did the research, was there have been 8 species within the past 18 years that are listed in Massachusetts as either threatened or species of special concern. 7 of those are within the past 6 years that have been documented in the town of Chelmsford. So I'm just concerned that if Chelmsford doesn't already have it in place to follow the guidelines set by the Mass Endangered Species Act, and which has been updated as of August 26, 2010. And I just want to go on record that the Chelmsford really should consider this as an immediate need.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you very
Sean,
much.
can we just get your full name?
Sean Sullivan, 8 Chestnut Ave.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Thank you.
Peggy Dunn, 2 Bridge Street, Town Rep, Precinct 1. Linda was talking about open space and being able to connect it, et cetera. I sat on the original Open Space Advisory Committee that wrote the first report sent to the state when the state asked everybody to do an open space plan. And at that time, I recommended that we do an overlay map that included all the private land that was wooded or open space, all the public land, all the, I think it's Chapter 61 land, and all the other, and do an overlay map, and also include the land underneath high tension wires and that sort of thing, so that we could see if there are any corridors or what land we might be able to include, et cetera, to see if that. This map was in the first draft you had on there, which is sort of what I had in mind. I don't know if that map still exists. It was somewhere in, it would have been Andy Sheehan's job, so I don't know whether it exists or not. But anyway, there was something that did show that kind of connection.
That is in there, Peggy, and as a matter of fact, I'll let Evan speak to this, but I know that the town is in the process of updating their open space and recreation plan.
Right.
And they're updating the parcel information that was used to put that map together.
Right,
so that
and we had the old railroad, right-of-way, plus the right-of-way that the utilities have, because there's a lot of space underneath those lines where animals can traverse from one place to another. I just had a couple of other just small things on zoning changes. People are very, this is the feedback I get from people, the concerns they have. They're concerned about zoning creep, and we saw it in the Westlands. We just went through a big fight over that. And people are afraid of that, and I think we should do everything possible to protect the residential zones, and if we can afford buffers around them, we don't have much land left, it would be a good idea. The other thing is the village zoning in the center. I believe that goes from the library to the lights, and then up to, I think, just beyond Bertucci's on Littleton Road, and I'm not sure it goes down Chelmsford Street.
I think you're pretty accurate with that. It's pretty close.
I'm sorry?
I think you're pretty accurate with that. I think it's pretty close to that.
Yeah, that's my understanding of it, but that was a few years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy.
Jim?
Yes, David.
Peggy, Beverly alluded to an open space master plan, which is also in the process of being done. That's a committee like the one you must have been on years ago.
Yes.
And there will be a series of maps and tables in that which will try to identify both private and public land, and it talks a lot about reinforcing what the master plan says to create corridors. In fact, there will be a warrant article in this fall's town meeting trying to identifying certain parcels which in fact abut conservation land so that we can get it under conservation responsive control and create more corridors. It won't, I mean, because there's so much private land in town, it's impossible to go from one place to another. But I will say there is about a 7.5-mile stretch now from Robin Hill down through Old Stage where people can where there is land that is actually contiguous as in the nature that you're talking about.
Right. And at the time that I was talking about this, we did a rather large one, and we had Mylar overlays so that it showed, you know, the Chapter 61, and it was interesting to see how you could achieve that kind of thing. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Peggy. Mary Ann?
Yes, Mary Ann Pereski. I would like some information about number 20. Review the in-law apartment regulations to improve the permitting process and to update the regulations to reflect the needs of today's families. I was wondering if you had in mind that an in-law apartment does not have to be attached to a home.
George, you want to take that one?
I'll let Evan, but I'll tell you this, on our next meeting, we are having a public hearing, visiting that bylaw. It was directed by the Zoning Board of Appeals, and Evan can talk a little more about it.
All right, so it's at the next planning board meeting?
Yes.
What the situation is now, that there can be only one living quarter on a lot of land?
I believe that's correct, and it's limited to X amount of square feet. And it's also limited to a family member.
Yes.
That's correct.
And then, if for some reason the house gets sold or the family member moves out, then that in-law apartment goes away and has to become part of the residence. So Evan can talk a little more about what's happening on Wednesday night.
Well, I'll go to the planning board meeting to hear the discussion. The thing that I notice after listening to everyone tonight is you've really got to bite a bullet and make up your mind for 10 years from now whether this is going to be a historical town, a suburban town, or a town transitioning into being a city. I find that it's really confusing which direction you're really going. I find the emphasis is on commercial, industrial, and not residential. So I hope that you think of 10 years from now. The last 10 years never turned out the way that we wanted it to turn out. And I think that you have to really make up your mind and inform us what direction you're really and truly going. Thank you.
Thanks, Marion.
Good evening. My name is Pete Robson. I live at 68 Stonegate Road, and I am a member of the committee. I wanted to make an apology to Roland and to the other people here. When I spoke at the table before, I was speaking, unfortunately, as myself, as a citizen in Chelmsford, and I was not necessarily speaking for the board. I am a member of the board. I am behind the board 100%, the findings of the board 100%. I was not explaining, unfortunately, what the board had decided. I was expressing my own frustration living where I do, I don't live out in the farm areas. I'm along 68 Stone Gate is off Anstey Road and Turnpike. And the areas around me are the areas that have these office complexes and factories and warehouses, which are starting to show decay, starting to show falling into the next generation. My own fear is that my neighbors and myself will wind up in an area that are, consists of whoever we can hire to come in and fill space, and we wind up with the problems of removing toxic waste and other things 20 years, 30 years from now. So I do apologize for any confusion I caused. I used the comfort of the chair up there rather than coming back here to talk to you the way I should have. I do suffer from Parkinson's, and there are times it gets kind of bad. But I do apologize again. If I've caused confusion for any of you, that is my fault. Please, it does not reflect on these people here. They've done a marvelous job. I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Lynn Sullivan. Hang on. I live on 14 Evergreen in Ruth Delaney's house. And I have a couple of things. I would suggest, based on what Marianne was saying and some of the other input, that you somehow define character when you present this information to the town. And it may be defining character by neighborhood, by section, by descriptives of where you're talking about, because let's face it, the character of our town is different from place to place. I live in the Westlands, in a community of older homes that are set in a very close proximity to each other. We have a Chelmsford Village Center. We're very lucky to have that. When we went looking for a place to live, that's what we were looking for. We're very lucky we can park in the center. There's plenty of parking. And if people did it, you can park and you can walk to the bank, the dry cleaner, the library, get a cup of coffee, have lunch, go to the CVS, pick up a few things in the store and walk back to your car. And when we grew up, that was what we did every Saturday. We walked to get my dad's check and do all those things. We're very lucky we have that, and we need to preserve that. So if we define the character to make it specific enough that everyone understands what that means, because to some people, the character of this town may be the shopping district, or to some people, the character of this town might be only the open spaces. So I think we need to make sure that we're clear when we use terminology, that everyone's on the same page. Another thing I wanted to say is it would be nice, and it may be addressed here, obviously I haven't read the whole master plan, but if we made some sort of a plan where we're going to hold owners accountable for their buildings and their empty buildings, if they have storefronts that are vacant, building lots that aren't being used, to maintain that property in the character of our town, however that's defined for that area. It's really distressing to see abandoned properties, neglected properties that detract or cause safety issues in our town. The other thing I wanted to say is, we talked about incentivizing for construction, maintaining the footprint of a smaller footprint for buildings. I'm not sure if it's included or not, but what if we incentivized current commercial owners to upgrade their properties to make them marketable now? Driving down Chelmsford Street, there's so many, what in my opinion are unattractive storefronts. Again, my definition of character, and maybe not yours, but it would be nice if they upgraded their properties to current standards or whatever the character is for that area, to incentivize people to want to live there or put their business there. And maybe some of that incentive, whether it be with variances or with financial incentives, would help and also improve aesthetics by allowing that improvements to happen with new design and architectural guidelines that meet the character, however it's defined for that area. The other thing regarding Evan's comments about being able to kind of utilize the master plan and sell it a little bit, obviously my word's not his, but I would suggest that it seems that in some cases we may be misunderstanding the intent of the recommendations, and I doubt that if I'm misunderstanding that I'm the only one, and that perhaps one of the ways to be able to clarify people's understanding of what the intent was of the recommendations you're making is to use some sort of an example to say, for instance, like Evan's example with Vinyl Square, that under the current guidelines, this is what could happen in this area. Our proposal is that we plan to change it to be this new model, which would limit development to include these things. And I think in that way, people would maybe understand what we have now. Because as we've all heard, many people, myself included, I don't understand the zoning guidelines we have now. So sometimes in here, it looks like we're changing things for more development, when in fact, by not understanding what we currently have allows, this is actually, in some respects, some of these things might be better. So I would suggest you make it set so that people who pick it up can understand what they're reading. That's all. I appreciate the work you've done on this. It's amazing. It's a big project. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions, comments, clarifications?
And those are great comments, and I will say that, you know, when we pass out this tonight, it's a quick synopsis of the recommendations, and we've tried to do a good job of, you know, within the body of the specific sections, explaining the issue, the problem, and why there's a recommendation to fit that problem. And obviously, we didn't expect people were going to read 700 pages.
It was a difficult download, actually.
I couldn't get my computer. It took me an hour to download one section, but but there are places we could do a better job.
Well, even if
being
it's with
explanatory
bullet
about it.
points for each thing, so it isn't, people aren't going to read, with all due respect, they aren't going to read that document. But if you have bullet point examples of, here's an example of what we're looking at in this section where things could be better, that would hit the highlights and make it a quick, easy thing for people to be able to read on the fly.
Yeah.
Jim?
Thank you.
There's going to be an executive summary that's going to be done. Maybe Beverly can talk about that real quick.
I guess we probably need to talk about this as a committee, but the executive summary probably, in my view, wouldn't have the detail that you're looking for. And unfortunately, I think to really understand the rationale and the thinking of the committee in terms of formulating these recommendations, although it's painful to pour over the narrative, if you just went into the document and you read the section that's called Issues and Opportunities at the end of every chapter, it talks about, it sort of sets the stage for the recommendations and gives sort of the thought process of the committee in terms of why they're suggesting these things. So a lot of the chapters are just data pieces and they establish the foundation, but if you just look at the issues and opportunities section, it would allow you to better understand what's contained in the recommendations. And that's, for most chapters, that's somewhere between about 2 and 4 pages, so it's not a considerable amount of reading. But maybe what we could do in the executive summary is include that within the executive summary prior to the recommendations, and that would give a better sense of why those recommendations exist.
But I think it'll be better understood if people can get a real feel of what's going to really.
I mean, the other thing that we struggle with is how long should an executive summary be as well? If you're starting to put together an executive summary that winds up being 50 pages, is it really an executive summary?
Exactly. And you want it to be something the average resident of Chelmsford will read and understand. Right. So you don't have to stay here for 12 hours answering questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Lynn. Okay, so looks like we're exhausted with questions, comments, feedback. I do want to tell you, we truly appreciate your candid and open feedback tonight, questions. The process is not complete, so please don't interpret that this document is done. That's why we're here tonight. It is an opportunity to take a look at what's been compiled and go back and make some modifications and insert some things and take some things out. So we appreciate you taking the time to come out tonight, because this document would not be possible without your help. Thank you. Have a good night. Everybody be safe.